Okay, so any questions about where we're at? And okay. What I wanted to look at tonight was goals, and particularly how we think about goals. If you've read today's blog that I sent out just a couple of hours ago, it had some interesting ways to think about goals, and particularly in terms of when you go to accomplish them, to look at next steps, and we'll get to those in a minute. But I want to go back to just think a couple of things, and I think I've mentioned this way back more at the beginning, or maybe it was during one of the adult forums. But when you think about a goal, one of the first things that you need to make sure is that the goal is positively stated. And the problem that we face over and over again in both our lives and in our society and church and any kind of organization or group, half the time is that our goal is a negation. We're trying to get something, we're trying to accomplish less of what we don't want. And I'm pretty sure you've heard me say, you know, what did Jesus come for? Was it to give us less death, or was it to give us life? And over again, I see us creating goals that are basically negations. We're wanting, I call them less death goals. All the prevention goals, being less miserable, less depressed, less unemployed, whatever it is that it's, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. One of the reasons why it doesn't work is that goal statement, less depressed. What you're doing is holding in focus what you don't want, and what you are focusing on is actually where you will go. So that would be the first thing. And it's people will often accuse me of being very positive, and I'm not sure whether that's true or not. I think because positive and negative in lots of ways is just a value judgment. But where I do get really quite crazy about positive and negative is on goal formulation and making sure that they are positive. The next thing, and I know we've talked about this when we were looking at values, you need to make sure that the goal is valuable, that there's, and this is even to put it mathematically, that the outcome you desire needs to be more valuable than where you're starting from. And so that would be another piece to make sure in terms of achieving your goals. But when I should also say that there are a couple of things that should never be goals. And one of them is getting acceptance. That will become a huge problem if we make acceptance a goal, or make love a goal. That it's kind of like you can think of a problem that you might have, and if you say something like, God will love me if I solve this problem. And that's very common. And I would hazard a guess, Joseph, in your work in spiritual direction, the numbers of people who will, they may not say that explicitly, but they'll come with some kind of spiritual problem. and their belief is if they could fix the spiritual problem, then God would love them. And all I can guarantee you, if that's the way you're constructing the issue in consciousness, you're going to be miserable a long time. And because it's only in the light of the love that we have with the problem will we have the power to journey to the solution. And that's the gospel. The gospel doesn't begin with, when we became perfect, Jesus died for us. If that was the case, two things. Jesus wouldn't have come. And the second thing is, if we were perfect, he wouldn't have needed to come. So it's kind of, that ain't going to happen. But it's, from a spiritual perspective, it's in the light of the love that we have today, right at this moment. That's where we have the power to journey to whatever goal we want. And I think it's the same when people will say, it's like, I will love myself if I accomplish my goal. I'll love myself if I lose 20 pounds, or I'll love myself if I do something or other or something or other. And particularly when you think of issues like weight or sobriety, some of the sort of addictions, patterns, or anything that you do that brings comfort, that if you're saying in your mind, when I solve this, I will accept myself, love myself, approve of myself. Again, I can guarantee you're going to be miserable. And what I know about miserable people is that what they typically do is go hit the fridge or the bottle or whatever it is that they do. So it's kind of like if you're saying, well, I'll love myself when I lose 20 pounds. And so you're sitting there feeling unloved, self-rejected and all the rest of it. And my experience of being in that kind of misery is to go hit the fridge, which really is counterproductive. So, and that's in the classic AA program, it's the realization that we are loved while we have the problem. And that the problem that you have cannot stop God loving you. So that, again, when you look at goals, if things like acceptance and approval are part of the goal, really ain't going to work. You're going to stay miserable. They have to be, if you like, the spiritual energy to actually proceed to the goal. The other thing I would say, and we took, Van.
Vaughn, do you have
May I ask, I understand your point about love as a goal. Oops, am I muted? No.
No, you're right. I can hear you.
I want to make sure that I understand about love. In a sense, I think I have an impression that our whole goal in this whole program is to become more loving. Is that so I want to make sure I'm not off track here.
No, I would say that's at the heart of any program that I would put together. Sort of, I may call them in all sorts of different names, and part of the focus may be on different aspects, but ultimately, the challenge to me is to wake up to this incredible good news that whether you feel it or not, you're one with all the love in the universe, and being able to share that love with the people you encounter. And so that journey begins, the beginning point needs to be an awareness that we are loved. It's not the destination. And I think too often people make love or acceptance or some of those kinds of things as the destination of the journey. And I think it's actually the beginning point, that we would grow our awareness of that. So here's...
I'd like to make a comment on something that I think is related in that the priestly people, the shepherds of the flock are generally, they're not dismissive and they're not judgmental. They try to support the flock and enhance the flock. And I think a lot of our modern society is just judgmental, and we do segregate people and dismiss them. Either they don't agree with an opinion that we hold important or dear. So I think there's something maybe mystical. It's spiritual, that it's an inheritance from our spiritual history. We need more people who are shepherds or act like shepherds, and not combative type human beings. So that's a kudu. Hats off to those that are spending their lives being spiritual leaders, like the three of you.
Well, thank you. I totally agree in the sense that I have very little time. In fact, I can become quite judgmental around judgmental people. And a big piece of it's really from the whole point.
You know what I meant, though? When you have a sick person,
oh, yeah, no.
you can't blame them for their sickness. You can only try to give them food and mental sustenance.
Well, yeah, and I think part of it is the whole issue that we live in a society that is super saturated with judgment, blame. A couple of days ago, I wrote about just even the word "why," which seems so reasonable in lots of ways. You know, why is this happening? And typically in our society, the word "why" is heavily associated to who's to blame for this nonsense, or wickedness, or whatever it is. And if you can figure out who's to blame, and somehow the problem will miraculously disappear. Well, in fact, it doesn't. You just know you still got the problem, and you know who's to blame. And I mentioned Albert Einstein once said that problems exist in our society because we keep asking the wrong question. And particularly this time of the year, I have often sort of told the story, if you know anything about Portland and Oregon, you'll know that its nickname is the Rose City. And I would say, if you imagine coming to work and right in the doorway of your workspace or on the front porch of the church, someone has dumped a huge truckload of horse manure. What we would do is run round and ask the question, who's to blame? Who's to blame? Who's to blame for this horse manure? And it's kind of like, and figuring out, if we could just figure out who dumped this, truckload of horse manure here, suddenly, miraculously, it would disappear. Well, now, if you're in Portland, Oregon, there's only one question. If someone dumps a truckload of horse manure in your front door, it's who grows roses? Because you find that person and that horse manure will disappear. It's like, and so we need to be changing the question and and particularly the why question, just crazy.
Rob,
Yeah, hey, Kelly.
that's really interesting, because I would think in the world of science, why is an important question. Like if you're looking for a vaccine to a disease and you're watching what the disease does.
I wouldn't be asking why. I would be asking what and how. So I could imagine, for example, somebody, or even someone, as a psychologist, if someone comes to me and says, well, I'm depressed, the first thing is, why are you depressed? Total waste of time from my experience. One of the questions that's kind of even better, depending on the circumstances, would be, well, tell me about this depression you have. How do you do it? You're an expert. Teach me how to be depressed. What would I have to do? And I think I actually did that with resentment when we were doing the forgiveness class. Teach me how to resent. And basically figure out the mechanism, and then figure out which is the weakest link in all of that we can interrupt. I haven't found why to be a helpful question. As an engineer, I'm much more interested in what and how, and then pondering what it is we need to do to change the outcome of that. So, I don't know. Even if we could understand, sort of, we know a lot more about the universe in terms of planets and the whole thing of, nuclear physics and all the modern science and quantum physics and all that kind of stuff. We know a whole bunch about that stuff. I don't think it's got anywhere near the why in terms of why are we here. I'm not sure who it was. We said, the answer, why are we here? Well, we're here to help others. What the others are here for, who knows? I think it was Oscar Wilde. But
Well, I want to add a comment about science and Einstein and humanity, and that is, if you consider that when the first nuclear bomb went off, the most educated people in the world, biggest collection of PhDs, they didn't know if there would be a sustained nuclear reaction that would have created a larger destructive nuclear effect. So they basically didn't know if they were going to ignite the atmosphere even. And there were serious scientists. Robert Oppenheimer, if you read his book, and I haven't read it, I've just read excerpts from it. But this is how crazy humanity is. We've got our current nuclear treaty. We have 200,000 we have 2,000 nuclear bombs, the U.S., and that's enough to make nuclear winter for a year and wipe out the food supply. And we're complaining about COVID-19 as a little play virus compared to a nuclear winter. But that's the kind of insanity that we have as human beings. And the only juxtaposing meaningful solution is love, is Jesus's message that we are our neighbor's keepers, and we do need to love each other, or life doesn't make any sense. To me, at least, that's my personal opinion.
No, and I'd agree completely. That I think what Christianity is offering the world is something that is incredibly countercultural. It's in the world and it's offering something to the world, but it's not of the world. It is really countercultural. And I think it offers what the world is longing for, but in large part, the world doesn't know it's longing for it. It's filling that longing with all sorts of stuff, and just missing the point. So I want to come back to goals and thinking about goals, that the next piece, once you've got a goal and you've made sure it's positive, you've made sure it's valued, you want to make sure it's sustainable. And particularly to ensure that it's sustainable, you need to think about the golden rule. If you are ripping someone off in order to achieve your goal, ultimately that won't be sustainable. It may not be, it could be a couple of generations, but you look at nations that have oppressed their people, eventually the oppressor or the oppressed will rise up against the oppressor. So that when people are being ripped off, now it may take, let's say, several generations, and that's part of the human struggle in lots of places, but those kinds of goals that are at someone else's expense are not going to be sustainable. So we need to check the goal that we have in relationship to, say, the golden rule. We've also talked about making sure that part of us doesn't object to the goal, and we want to satisfy, not overcome those objections, and we've talked about that previous days. The other thing is that what we want to do is to get a clear picture in our mind of the goal. And one of the cool tricks to doing that is to actually create a movie rather than getting a still picture of the goal, to actually create a movie with you in the movie. And there are several reasons for making a goal a movie, is because it will include the outcome and also include the work that you're doing to actually accomplish it. So it's like, we have a goal of building a new parish hall or something like that at the church, or something like that. We've got this, and if you just get a picture of that in your mind, that will be a little bit helpful. But if you have a movie of that in your mind, you'll have a whole lot better information, because you'll be seeing what was done to accomplish that goal. So we now got some plan included. And there'll also be some outcome. We'll see the people coming and using the parish hall or doing different things. And so, it's kind of, if you go back to something simple, and I know just about most of my adult life, I have sort of battled my weight and put on a few pounds, lose a few pounds, put on a few pounds, lose half of that. And it's never ending. And then particularly when I was traveling extensively and sort of not being able to control my food source, that was often really problematic. But here's the interesting thing. I'd look at a donut, and it's almost like I'd go through this argument with the donut. It's like, I like the taste of donuts. And so, but I've got a very static picture, and it's not just a visual picture, it's a very static, taste in my mouth of the donut. Now, if I argue with the donut at that point, I'm going to lose. But if I play the movie through of me eating the donut and make that a movie, I will include 5 minutes after I've eaten the donut. And you've got all that fat and sugar sitting in my gut going, and so I've actually now incorporated into that goal sense of not eating the donut, and I realize that's a negative goal, and there's problems with that as well. But the point that I'm making is that when you create a goal, it's better to do that as like a movie in your mind than just a static picture, because you'll have the plan, the things that you've done to accomplish it, and then you'll have the outcome and the consequences, and that you'll see those, sort of the long-term outcome, rather than just this little static snapshot, which may look good, but it's got no consequences in it. Now, so we figured out our goal. So here's a question for you. I want you to imagine a goal that's just a little bit out of your reach. Think of a goal that's a little bit out of your reach. And the next question, as you think about this goal that's just out of your reach, notice how you reach for it. Do you reach for it with both hands, your left hand, your right hand? How do you reach for a goal that's just out of your reach? So I'm curious, do you reach, how many people would reach with both hands? Or are you reaching with one hand? And if you're reaching with one hand, which hand is that? Now, I'll show, I mean, if we were in person, when I do a training, I'll often do this after lunch one day just to get people standing up and doing an exercise. I'd get people to stand up and say, okay, show me reaching for a goal. And it's kind of interesting because a whole bunch of people will have their hands kind of out like that. Yep. But then there'll be another whole bunch of people that will have their hands kind of up like that. Sometimes I've seen people reach like this, and other people are reaching like that. And one guy was actually reaching like this. Now here's the interesting thing, and it's kind of what I was alluding to in the newsletter for today, was that if you're reaching out like this, then the first step you need to do is just take a step forward. But if you're going like this, reaching up this way, you could take all the steps forward in the world, and you'll never reach that goal. Because the person who's reaching up like this, they really need to take a step up. Now, the person who's going like this being my right hand, they're going to need to, they can step forward all they want, and it ain't going to happen. They need to pay attention to what's right. And I've done this in training programs, and it was really interesting. And what is fascinating is when I will say, people, and I can look people in the eye and say, and you need to take a step up. And you just pause, and then you say to them, and you know what it means to step up in this situation, don't you? And they'll just look at me as, how did you know? It's like, well, I didn't. I just know if you're reaching up this way, you're going to have to step up. And this was one lady, and she was really putting her hand out like this to the right. And I said to her, but you're going to need to focus and pay attention to what's right and do what's right. and to then just to pause and say, and you know what's right, don't you? And her eyes get as big as saucers, and she thinks I'm mind reading and all of this kind of stuff. And it's just, I'm paying attention to where her goal is. Now, if you've got your goals out here, you're going to need to pay attention to what's left to do. And then there was the guy who had his arms stretched out. One was going left, one was going right. And it was really fascinating because he was a pastor who was trying to figure out whether he should leave his congregation. And he was torn, literally torn between, or pulled apart by what was right for him to do and what he had left to do in the congregation. And he was trying to sort those out. And what I found fascinating, probably the biggest learning in the last, say, 10 years, is really paying attention to the language we use. And I know we used a whole bunch of it in the forgiveness program, that all of the, what we would think of as metaphoric commentary about our memories and our thoughts and the way we picture things in our mind, that all of those things is actually literally true of how we are processing stuff in our minds. And when I listen to people and their goals, and particularly, when they'll come for coaching, it's because they've got a goal that they haven't been able to accomplish. And most of the time, they've been taught, well, first thing is take a step forward. And if you ask them, well, think about this goal, what's it like? And it's like, well, I'm on a cliff edge. And there's this big cliff. How deep is it? Oh, it goes way down, way down. And where's the goal? Oh, it's way over there. And if that person takes a step forward, it is going to be really painful and distressing because they're going to crash. And their own inner wisdom knows that that's the way this reality is. And so if you just tell a person to take a step forward, or you just got to jump off the cliff, dude, go for it, which a whole bunch of coaches would tell you to do, take a leap, not going to be a good idea. Or I think of people who'd say, well, yeah, I want to accomplish this goal, but when I think about it, it just feels like there's a big wall in front of me. Well, so what you need to do is take that person to a breakthrough coach. And there are coaches that basically that's what they do. They'll promise you a breakthrough. We need a breakthrough in your life. And they'll basically propel you through that wall. Well, I don't know whether you've met many people who are like that, who are into breaking through. My experience of they're not pleasant people to hang out with. And here's the other crazy piece of it, though, is if you have a guy whose internal experience is that in front of him is a big, huge chasm and he's standing on a cliff edge, and you just tell him, well, you go to a breakthrough coach, he's got to break through that. It's like, that is also a bunch of nonsense. Yep. So one of the things that I have really found really important is to listen to people's internal experience and the metaphors they use, because they're actually telling us an enormous amount of wisdom. And the simplest way to understand people's metaphors is to treat them absolutely literally. So when someone is reaching up, they need to step up. So and here's another example, and this was actually more in the area of discernment. I was working with a pastor who she also was discerning whether she wanted to stay in this congregation. She'd been there, she was a Lutheran pastor, and in the Episcopal Church and in the Lutheran Church, in some transitions, we have this, I jokingly call them rent-to-own options, where you go as kind of an interim for 3 years, and if they like you and you like them, you get to stay. And if it's not working, then you go on and do something else. And she was in one of these situations. In the Episcopal Church, we call it a priest in charge under special circumstances. And it's usually done when congregation has been very conflicted or something else crazy has kind of happened. And the congregation at the point when they're making some of these decisions, they don't have the stability to be able to say, yes, this is the person we need or what have you. And so the bishop may send somebody and say, well, check this person out. If you get together and connect, you can stay together. Well, she's doing one of these. Now she has like an 18-month, 2-year-old daughter. And it was the first and probably only child. It was a late child in this couple's relationship. She's not going to have many more children. And she says, I'm really torn. On the one hand, I have this parish that I really like working, love the people, they love me, and I really like being a pastor. On the other hand, I have my daughter, and she's probably going to be my only child, and I just want to be a stay-at-home mom for a while and hang out and care for my daughter. And just, they grow up so fast. So she's feeling really torn, and she doesn't know how to make the decision. So what would you say to her? She says, on the one hand, I got this parish, and on the other hand, I've got this daughter. How would we help her? What do you reckon?
20-hour work week.
What's that?
A 20-hour work week, part-time.
20.
There's no
part-time?
such thing in parish ministry, Jeff.
I would agree with you, Kelly.
I was making a ha-ha.
Did you ask her, Rob, which was in which hand?
That's what I did, because notice she has already told me something really important. Now we would just say, well, this is a metaphor or an idiom or something. She says, I just simply asked her. Now, in the past, before I knew what I know now, I would have probably done pros and cons, put a piece of paper with a line down the middle and worked all the pros, all the cons, and done all that, and somehow or other try to figure it all out, right? Getting, in a sense, very rational. And you can see that this is not really a rational issue. These are two issues of the heart. She loves being a pastor. She loves being a mom. This is not a rational thing that she's really working on. And so, but she said, on the one hand, so I just said to her, it's interesting you say on the one hand, so I'm curious, which hand is which? Which hand is your daughter and which hand is the parish? And she ponders a minute and she says, well, my daughter's in my right hand and the parish is in my left hand. And then I said to her, one of the things that I've discovered in life is sometimes you just got to do what's right because the other stuff will always be left to do. And she just sort of sat there and then went, wow. And this was on a telephone call with a group of people. And when she went, wow, I said, okay, you need to get off the telephone. and just sit with what you've discovered. And actually, it wasn't for about 3 months. And I'd sort of kept in touch with her and what have you, but it was about 3 months later, I asked her, I said, so tell me, what did you decide to do? And the reason I didn't ask her at the time was she had had this profound wow. She knew what she needed to do. And I didn't want to contaminate that with a whole lot of intellectualization, thought, mess it all up, reinstall the problem, get her second guessing anything. It was like, she knew what she needed to do. She had clarity. And so it was like, and I just basically booted her off the phone. Or if, I think of Jesus, what he would do is send her to go and wash in the pool or do something, nothing of any significance in one sense, but it's just, you need to go and do something, take a walk, reflect, just sit with this awareness that you've got. And so it was 3 or 4 months later, I asked her, so what did you decide to do? I'm just curious. And in lots of ways, it's none of my business, really. And of course, she did what was right. So when we think of these goals that we've got, and the point of this whole thing is, and this is really important, particularly when we seem to be blocked or stuck or unable to achieve a goal that we've got in mind. Typically in those situations, the solution isn't just going to be purely rational in the sense that you can rationalize it out. When there's something of your heart tangled up in it, or it's kind of a metaphor in some ways, but you think about all the ways that people feel held back, other people feel pushed forward, or pushing a boulder up a hill, or just stuck. The answer is actually in exploring that metaphor, and particularly treating the metaphor really literally. Now, I will say, going back to what's right and what's left, the stuff that when we think of a goal and it's maybe out to our right, that may not necessarily be truly right. It could be what we have been taught is right, which may actually be wrong. So that's part of what we need to clarify with people in terms of accomplishing their goals. And I think particularly our stuff that's out on the right is also likely to have a lot of shoulds in it, and that can really mess stuff up, and
You get
goals that we need to stop shooting on yourself.
Rob, this is Jeff. On the shoulds and stuff, it seems in our modern society that as our stereotype Americans, we have a predisposition to thinking that we can do it both. We can do it all. I should be able to do it all, or I'm going to feel guilty if I don't try to do it all. So a person who's got an important job, and they've got 3 kids at home, and they're in their growth stages of 7, 8, and 9, and it's important to have a mama and a father. There are all suboptimal solutions as far as, well, I've got kids at home, but my boss wants me to work an extra 2 hours tonight. So again, getting back to the parish example of, do I choose my child or do I choose my congregation? It's just a paradox there, and that's why the 20-hour work week, whatever the hours are, how do we balance out an effective and practical and right choice versus counteracting all these predispositions or going against the ways we were taught, etc.?
I think there, the big piece of that, I think what we really need to do is to step back and explore what our core purpose is. I don't think you'll ever solve that problem. It's like, well, I should spend time with my children and I should spend time at work to make the money to spend time with my kids. If all of those options are being promoted from or motivated by a should, I don't think there will be much life in that at all. I think that's where I would suggest we need to step back and understand what is our real purpose, and then, which is, from my perspective, timeless. And then how can I manifest my purpose with my family, my boss, my work, all of those situations, and in a way to be able to integrate them. And a big piece of it, I think, is changing the motivation by which we do all of those things. Because if you're doing all of that work for status, that will be a tyrant. And, you know, I know, well, I can think of several bosses that people have had. And Steve Jobs was a classic one. People would work for Steve Jobs, obviously highly creative, incredible person in all sorts of ways, but people would work long hours and put in huge energy to get a crumb of affection from him, and was really a miserable jerk to work for. And I can think of other bosses, and part of it is also, it's not just the boss, because some employees would work there for a week and say, screw this, I ain't doing this, this is crazy, and just walk away. But other people, for some reason, will get hooked in and really tied up in that. And I can think of a priest I worked with. Her rector was one of those people, and it was amazing to watch this huge staff around this rector. They would do almost anything for a crumb of affection from this rector. And that rector was really a tyrant in those people's lives. And yet wasn't really mean-spirited, or there was some sort of synergistic relationship between how people would want that rector's approval. You know, it was really quite bizarre to watch.
Is that when your goals all messed up, Rob?
Yeah, and I think that's where it's kind of like, I'm going to do this, and my goal is to get my boss's approval.
Get the crumb.
And what's that?
Get the crumb.
Yeah, to get a crumb. In fact, I remember one spiritual director says, you need to stop working for approval. You need to start working for money. That checking underneath some of our behaviors in terms to see if really what's motivating them, and approval is, if you're really doing stuff to get someone's approval, that person will easily become a tyrant in your life. And, you know, it's like render to Caesar what is Caesar and render to God what is God's. But boy, Caesar can be pretty miserable to work for. And that one particular situation was really quite remarkable, because the person, as I say, wasn't mean-spirited or nasty at all. Wasn't very sort of warm and friendly, but for some reason their approval was of immense value, and the staff would bend over backwards to get a crumb of that. And checking out the motivation, because I remember working with one of the priests, and I didn't know then what I know today. I would have, I think, been a lot smarter working with the person. It was clear to me the person needed to leave, but they felt incredibly guilty and disloyal, even contemplating leaving. That was a big part of it.
Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I've got it. I've got it. There you go.
Yeah, is that better?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Oh, good. Rob, I don't know if this fits a little, but I think when you first came March 1st to St. Peter's, I think you said to the congregation something about informed consent, and it sort of struck me as different. I mean, you know, I'm not used to some authority figures doing that. So, but is there some kind of connection with what you just talked about, the tyrant situation, where you were kind of inviting people to I guess, think about their goals and, you know, give informed consent to your service? Is that kind of what you were saying?
I think when I was talking about informed consent, I was using that as probably as a metaphor for just wanting to share a little bit of my story with the people, so they'd kind of have a sense of where I'm coming from and where I was going to. And if you didn't really want to take the journey, well, yeah, I go back to working for the tyrant. In one sense, there was informed consent, but there was also, it gets really tricky, because you end up blaming the victim or what have you in some of those situations. And the people could leave. And I think of this one priest that I worked with, they could leave, but they couldn't. And they knew what they were getting into. Or at least, maybe not initially, they didn't realize what they were getting into, but they certainly knew, you know, they knew what would happen if they stayed, but in their mind, they couldn't leave. That was where the guilt and the should and all of that kind of stuff and kept them trapped.
I think sometimes it's a little easier to see this in more familiar terms, you know, with intimate relationships and partners. You know, it's sometimes for folk, it's harder to go, well, why would you, you know, but when you go, you know, when you decided to do what you wanted to do as opposed to what your mother wanted or your father wanted, the break that happened there, that's almost the equivalent there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of some of the reasons that we don't achieve our goals is the motivation to achieve them is all messed up, so to speak. It could be old parental stuff. You'll never amount to anything, or I remember when I was working in the medical hospital as a psychologist, there was a physician who didn't become a physician till he was in his 40s or 50s. It was kind of a late, but he had grown up in a family where everybody was a physician. In fact, I think he was sort of signed up for Johns Hopkins, the day he was born, he was sort of signed up for medical school kind of thing. And in his rebellion, there was like no way in heck was he going to become a doctor, because his parents wanted him to be a doctor. And it wasn't until he was in his 40s and old enough and mature enough to say, I know my family wanted me to be a doctor, but I actually want to be a doctor, but I want to do it because I want to do it and not do it because I'm just following the family business, so to speak. But I think there are times when we get goals given to us that really aren't our goals. To maybe go to school, get into a particular course.
Have you seen there's a really great Netflix film called Unorthodox. It's a little problematic, but what's interesting about the film is it's about a woman who leaves her Orthodox community. And she does so for a number of reasons because of her values. I mean, you see this happening with Hasidic Jewish children going to going to the science museum and being fascinated. So it's deep. There are many layers to why you stay and why you try to make it work.
And I can, and this would be going back to the question of sustainability and satisfying objections. I think of a guy who his father was a priest, actually may have even been a bishop. And it's the family business, so he doesn't want to be a priest, but basically the big pressure is to become a priest, so he goes off to seminary and he does quite well and goes off to a parish and ends up having an affair with a parishioner and basically gets defrocked. And I think it was his way of actually getting out. Mm-hmm. He was able to say to his dad, "Hey, Dad, I did everything you wanted me to do. I went and got ordained and all of that kind of stuff, but they tossed me out." And so, sort of the self-sabotage that you can see. Mm-hmm. My experience of self-sabotage is there's some big internal objection to achieving the goal. Mm-hmm. And if we continue to overcome that objection rather than satisfy it, it will just turn around and bite us in some way and sabotage our accomplishing the goal.
Rob, this is Jeff. I was wondering if you could comment some on goals that involve you versus joint goals that involve others. And I'm thinking in terms of a girlfriend-boyfriend relationship, or moving in with somebody, or getting married, or gee, you've got two working parents and they've got to work out compromises,
Mhm.
or
Well, I mean,
what the words I'd put around it are like, you know, what is the best path or right path? And a parallel is like when you get in a canoe with two people, you have to coordinate and get the paddles working together. And there's a lot of things in life that are like that when you have to work with others, and the canoeing seems appropriate. And,
well, yeah, and I think, you know, if you were to use the,
one more thing, I've really appreciated other religions, like the Dalai Lama talks about enlightenment, and there's other philosophies that talk about, you know, life, spiritual life, and it's just really interesting to listen to the goodness and the human spirituality, you know, that should be taken into consideration with goal setting and making decisions that affect others, not just yourself.
well, and I think what you're pointing to there, Jeff, and you know, the idea of canoeing, because it's whenever you're engaged with somebody else, and another situation, for example, would just simply be church. When, and you know, if you think of the canoe as a metaphor, first thing is you've got to figure out, where are we going? I mean, if I'm paddling away like crazy and you're paddling away like crazy, we need to be paddling at least to get in the same direction, to be getting to the same goal. And so we think about, so what is the goal? Now, from my perspective, before we even get to having a goal in it, whether it be in any kind of relationship, more than one person, but even as an individual, we really need to understand what our values are, and so that we've got more than just having a shared set of goals. We need a shared set of values. And then I would also come back to the idea of having a shared vision, which is, if you like, the big picture piece that was one of the, I think it was a prophet in the Old Testament. You all know the quote, without a vision, the people perish. The sense, and the big thing there is it has to be a shared vision. And that's part of the search process, for example, and it's all on hold kind of in a way at the moment at St. Peter's. The first task is to sort of refresh and to come up with or refresh a sense of shared vision, because the classic question that many congregations ask their priest is, what's your vision for our congregation? And it's kind of like, well, good luck, because of what that congregation is likely to experience is a great deal of frustration, because the priest is going to come and inflict their vision on the people. And the real goal is actually for the congregation to be able to share their vision with the candidates, and to find the candidate who says, wow, that's a cool vision, it matches my vision. And I think we can work together and have some fun achieving that shared vision. So I'd come back, Jeff, to answer the question, that the big thing is, what are our shared values and what's our shared vision? In 5 years' time, if we were incredibly successful, what would we have accomplished? And to be able to articulate what that is. And that's kind of the beginning work. What the search committee is working on is to be able to articulate some of that. We'd hope to have had some of those conversations in the congregation, but obviously with every shelter at home and all that kind of stuff, we haven't been able to have them. But that would be, well, and I would think even like on Sunday when we had the congregation meeting talking about what we're going to do in terms of coming back, some people are ready to come back. The vast majority, from what I can sense, are saying, no, it's too soon. Now, if you put those people in a room where you could say, well, we could do staying at home and coming back to church, add those two together and divide by 2, and now we've got a compromise, which probably isn't going to work. What we need to do at that point is go deeper and say, so what is it that we really value? And I think one of the things that we value are the people. We value safety. Another piece is that people at St. Peter's value, and correct me if I'm wrong, is music. And that becomes a big challenge because now the organ music's fine, but being in a church and singing is not a cool thing to be doing at the moment. So if we value safety, it may be better to stay at home and listen to recordings of the hymns that have been sung, that may actually be more edifying and satisfy that value of music than sitting in the church and not singing. So whenever there's a conflict, my basic methodology is to go deeper to see if we can find some common ground, to change the question. Well, I think I used the illustration, if I like action movies and my wife likes great literature and drama, what movie are we going to see? And it's like, well, the compromise would be we'd see the first half of her movie and the last half of my movie. And that is going to be really unsatisfying. But if the goal is to have some time together, free from all the work that needs to be done or something, then maybe going out for a good dinner might actually satisfy that. So it would be to figure out what's the purpose of this activity, and is there a way to accomplish that purpose beyond just the 2 things that we've sort of currently thought of. I'm just looking at the time. Do we have any more questions about goals?
Could you comment some on trade-offs, since we're both engineers, and trade-off on a goal? Some things are sort of culturally built in and we're predisposed to, and other things are creative, as in an artist or a musician or somebody. You really don't want to wait tables if your desire is to be a creative artist. So even at St. Peter's, there's you touched on trade-offs, music versus risking the choir getting sick. So I'm just speaking generally about that aspect of it.
Well, I think in the give and take of life, we often negotiate and do things that maybe we're not crazy about, but we do it. Now, we can do it out of obligation and duty, and that will work for a little while. But I think we also need to find a place where we would do it for another because we love them, and it's really cool to watch them delighting in something. And even if you're not crazy about it, and maybe this is just a value of mine, I find it truly delightful to watch somebody doing what they delight in, even if it's not my thing. So I think it's finding some of those things so that it's, because if you're just, yes, there's a lot of give and take and a lot of trade and what have you. And I do work for money, and I trade that money for a piece of forest here in Oregon and all of that kind of stuff. And that there is, one of the ancient philosophers once said, there's no free lunch. But I think we also need to find a place in our life where we are doing things because we just purely enjoy doing them. And to do those things that we cannot not do because they're just a real blast. And it's the energy we get from those things that will empower us or tide us through the trade-offs or the things that we're doing that because we need food and we need, the artist needs a roof over their head or whatever it is. So if we spend our whole life trading, I think we're going to miss the point. Well, folks, next week we're going to look at life in the spirit, getting ready for Pentecost. So we'll...
Be well. Have a good night.
Hey, take care. Cheers, folks.
Happy Ascension Thursday.